Yeah, it was. It was definitely one of the toughest times. There were other times as well where I was like struggle financially. Like um that was a big part of my journey as well. I think it's for a lot of guys. Finances, right? Scarcity is one of the things programmed into the 3D, right?
It's
This,
also because men define themselves by money so
yeah,
much.
self-worth.
Mm,
We can talk about self-worth as well because
yeah.
it's hugely tied to money typically.
What is the link between self-worth and success and self-worth and money?
It's massive, massively intertwined. And when I realized this, when I realized that the guys who are most successful have very high self-worth, even if it's not warranted self-worth,
Mm.
yet they're still successful. I was like, okay, there's something I get to figure out here, right? But how can I do this in an integrated way? So for the longest time, I didn't even know self-worth was a thing. I didn't even, if you ask, the first time I heard about it was I was at university in our enterprise center. So it's like our business center. And the head of enterprise name was Finbar, said, one of the things I think young entrepreneurs struggle with is self worth. And that was the first time I heard self worth. And I was like, oh, okay. So that's like what you, what you're worth. Like, is that financial worth or like, what is that? Right.
Yeah.
But it planted the seed. And truly, when I understood what self worth was, it wasn't even that many years ago. It was during my first ayahuasca experience. It was when I went and sat with Mother Aya, and she took me through the roughest ride of my life. It was deeply physically painful, emotionally painful, mentally painful, spiritually painful. It was complete disillusion of myself. And I realized after going through this experience, and I remember laying on my side, right? You usually lay on like a mat or a blanket or something. And I remember I was in the fetal position and I was just covered by this blanket, by this white, thin blanket. And I remember opening my eyes. It was the morning after. And I just remember feeling so fragile. I felt like if you just touched me, I would have just shattered. It felt like all of the layers of armor, of protection, of ego had just been fully removed.
Mm.
And as I got out of that blanket, it was like being reborn, like a little baby bird. And I just remember I've got goosebumps on my arms right now. You can probably see. This was one of the most pivotal points in my life because I realized that I had very little self worth, and it was a scary moment because my ego was saying, "What do you mean? You've got plenty of things to be worthy for. You should be worthy for this. You're this person," and it was all external. I didn't even feel I was with some friends and an ex at the time. I didn't feel worthy of even having those relationships with those people. And the shaman, who's incredible, his name's Anthony, one of just beautiful soul, explained to me what that was and what self worth was. And we used that as the talking point for the whole group. And that was where the healing journey began of self worth, of realizing that what he said to me was that your worth is not defined by what you've done in this human plane. You are worthy for being born. That in itself gives it inherent worth. And at the time, I couldn't accept that. I could not accept that I could be worthy just for being. I, I think particularly in men, I think it's slightly different with men and women. I think women can accept that a little bit easier, but as a man, there is an element where we do create our own value, right? There's a real thing to that, right? Through building, through creating, through becoming more intelligent so that we can do things. There's a real part to that, right? So that part which I knew then and still do believe to be true, that we do create our own value,
Mm.
couldn't accept the self-worth part. How could I be worthy if I'm like laying back
Just for being born.
just for being born, right? Well, how does that give me any worth, right? So it's a bit of a dichotomy.
And so, how did you come to understand that?
It was a journey. It was a real journey. I would say one of the pivotal moments was working with another shaman, funnily enough, not in plant medicine. I worked with someone called a Heyoka, which is essentially means sacred clown. And we went through this process to which he would describe as trauma release, essentially going back to moments in the past and going through a specific process to release them energetically, which I did. And I realized that so many of the things that had caused me pain, whether it was a heartbreak, whether it was, my parents splitting up, my dad leaving and me grabbing onto his leg, not wanting him to leave and feeling unworthy as that little child, all these micro moments that build up this use case to create the illusion that I was not worthy, I was able to let them go. And I was able to do that myself. I was able to do that by self processing it, by allowing the energy to pass, because essentially the way these things are created is just simply by the mind. So the memory, repeating that memory in the mind, which then causes an emotion in the body. And what is an emotion? It's energy in motion. So it's energy which gets trapped in the body. And that's what causes the lack of self-worth. That's what causes the heartbreak. That's what causes, the resentment to the ex. That's what causes the anger, right?
Stuck energy.
Stuck energy. That's all it is. On the most foundational level, you can use any modality. You can use plant medicine, you can use therapy, you can use going to a retreat, you can use doing 10 days in darkness, you can use any modality. At its core, what's happening is you're just releasing energy. And energy wants to flow. All energy wants to do is flow, can't be created or destroyed. So until we realize that we are the only ones keeping that energy trapped, it is our decision, whether that's a conscious decision or unconscious decision. I would argue it's almost always unconscious. Once we accept that and take responsibility for our own, for our state where we are, then we can say, okay, actually, I can release this now. And that's why for some people, 10 years of therapy to get to the point where they realize that their mom actually did love them or their dad was actually proud of them can be the right path for them. But for me, I'm always like, how can we shortcut this, right? I don't want to spend 10 years. I don't want to go work 50 years. I don't want
Classic entrepreneur.
Yeah, I'm like, we got to figure out a way to do this quicker. And so straight to the root cause, and this is now, he initiated me into this process, and I've developed my own process for this. Because also you got to be at a certain level of consciousness to even be able to do that, right? Anyone can benefit from it, but it helps more when you've developed your own intuition, you've expanded your own consciousness first. And so when I was able to release that, and how do you know when you've released it, Ibrahim? How do you know when you've actually released it, right? God, that's a good question, right? It took me a while to figure this out as well, but here's the scoop. You've released it when it no longer brings up any emotion, any sensation. That's when it's gone.